T-minus 15 seconds and counting.
Pressurized.
10, 9, 8, 7,
5,
6, 5, 4,
Drop.
3, 2,
Ignition.
1.
Liftoff.
Liftoff.
Roger, this is Liberty Bell 7. The clock is operating.
Loud and clear, Jose. Don't cry too much.
Okie doke.
July 1961. Gus Grissom, the sole occupant of the spacecraft Liberty Bell 7, is lofted into a 15-minute suborbital spaceflight atop an Army Redstone field rocket.
It looks good. It looks like a good launch. Go, baby, go.
Coming off the peg, the oxygen is go with 26 amps.
Roger, 688. Trajectory is good.
Roger, looks good here.
Pitch over here to go into trajectory. It looks like a good launch.
Nearby, at Cape Canaveral Air Force Station, there already sits on the pad something much, much bigger. The Saturn I. Combining 8 Redstone rocket fuel tanks, 1 Jupiter rocket fuel tank, and powered by 8 H-1 medium-lift rocket engines, it has an unprecedented 1.5 million pounds of thrust. It's the first in a new family of vehicles that are not designed for launching nuclear weapons. Saturn, unlike Redstone, Atlas, or Titan, was built from the ground up to be a human launcher. It's designed by the team working at Huntsville, Alabama, led by Dr. Werner von Braun, an ex-SS engineer who designed the V-2 ballistic missile, Redstone, and Jupiter rockets. Despite being the mastermind behind these military marvels, Saturn is von Braun's dream. On October 27, 1961, SA-1 launches into the sky, rumbling the air around Cape Canaveral far louder than the Redstone. On September 11, 1962, President Kennedy meets face-to-face with the man he hopes can build the machines that can carry humans to the surface of the moon. The following day, the president flies to Rice University in Texas and begins the speech that will galvanize the American people into a frenzy for space exploration.
President Pitzer, Mr. Vice President, Governor, Congressman Thomas, Senator Wiley and Congressman Miller, Mr. Webb, Mr. Bell, scientists, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I appreciate your President having made me an honorary visiting professor, and I will assure you that my first lecture will be very brief. I am delighted to be here, and I'm particularly delighted to be here on this occasion. We meet at a college noted for knowledge, in a city noted for progress, in a state noted for strength, and we stand in need of all three. For we meet in an hour of change and challenge, in a decade of hope and fear, in an age of both knowledge and ignorance. The greater our knowledge increases, the greater our ignorance unfolds. The vast stretches of the unknown and the unanswered and the unfinished still far outstrip our collective comprehension. But this city of Houston, this state of Texas, This country of the United States was not built by those who waited and rested and wished to look behind them. This country was conquered by those who move forward, and so will space. There is no strife, no prejudice, no national conflict in outer space as yet. Its hazards are hostile to us all. Its conquest deserves the best of all mankind, and its opportunity for peaceful cooperation may never come again. But why, some say, the moon? Why choose this as our goal? And they may well ask, why climb the highest mountain? Why, 35 years ago, fly the Atlantic? Why does Rice play Texas? We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills. Because that challenge is one that we're willing to accept, one we are unwilling to postpone, and one we intend to win, and the others too. Many years ago, the great British explorer George Mallory, who was to die on Mount Everest, was asked why did he want to climb it. He said, because it is there. Well, space is there, and we're going to climb it. And the moon and the planets are there, and new hopes for knowledge and peace are there. And therefore, as we set sail, we ask God's blessing on the most hazardous and dangerous and greatest adventure on which man has ever embarked. Thank you.
And thus, it was so. Just like that, America's investment in space quadrupled. For NASA, it was time to step it up. Engine tests of the mighty F-1 rocket engine roared throughout Huntsville and Cape Kennedy, and a fleet of Saturn I's began rolling into production. New spacecraft, new materials, new ideas, theories, and tests, new missions, fuels, engines, pipes, computers, and personnel all came flooding onto the scene. SA-2 and SA-3 both repeat SA-1's success in 2 subsequent launches. Thousands of gallons of water is released into the upper atmosphere to view the effect on weather as a live first stage is flown with a dummy second stage. Finally, on January 29, 1964, SA-5 launches with the first live second stage of the Apollo program, the S-4. Designed to eventually push a manned spacecraft beyond the bounds of Earth orbit, the S-4's 6 RL-10 engines are designed to ignite after separation from the first stage. It is the first heavy-lift launch vehicle to successfully demonstrate the concept of staging.
The primary objective of this mission is to flight test the Saturn I vehicle, which consists of an S-1 first stage and an S-4 second stage. For the S-4 stage, the major objectives are to achieve separation from the S-1 stage, to effect in-flight ignition of liquid hydrogen-fueled engines, to achieve engine operation until fuel depletion, and to place in the desired orbit the spent S-4 stage and the payload. The design of the S-4 stage and its operational systems, while based upon proven engineering concepts, required considerable pioneering. Several unique features are incorporated in the S-4 airframe, which must support the weight of its own 100,000 pounds of cryogenic propellants, plus the weight of the instrumentation unit and payload.
Onboard cameras capture all the action, as SA-5 staging is an early high note in the Apollo development program. All 6 hydrogen engines turn on and emit a beautiful blue flame as the S-4 comes up to thrust, high above the atmosphere of Earth.
To briefly review, the major portions of the Apollo spacecraft are the launch escape subsystem, the boost protective cover, the command module, the service module, and the spacecraft adapter, which carries the LEM, or Lunar Excursion Module.
Back on the ground, things were beginning to pick up a pace. The Apollo program would see 2 command modules, a Block 1, which would be ready soon for Earth orbital tests, and a later Block 2 with refined systems that would go to the Moon. Tests such as RCS, navigation, interface, and launch simulation all happened within the confines of NASA's testing facilities. But parachute drop tests and launch escape system tests had to be flown elsewhere, high above the California desert at Edwards Air Force Base. One of NASA's many concerns was that the spacecraft itself could be engulfed in a gigantic fireball and destroyed in the event of a launch vehicle failure. The solution for the Gemini program was ejection seats, but Apollo was too bulky and there were too many crewmen sitting too close to each other for this alternative. What if they could design an ejection seat for the entire vehicle? That solution came in the form of an earlier fix used on the Mercury capsule, a launch escape system. This giant rocket situated in front of the capsule would pull the vehicle away in the event of an early shutdown, and its first test came on May 13, 1964. Atop a small, custom-built rocket known as Little Joe, the Block 1 capsule would be blasted to a high altitude and speed, where its launch escape system was designed to activate. However, the engineers had accidentally installed the roll gyroscopes upside down, and the vehicle began tumbling in flight. After losing structural integrity, the rocket broke apart. The launch escape system noticed, and just like that, the Apollo capsule was pulled from the vehicle safely. High above the deserts of California, NASA's small failure had led to the most perfect test conditions anyone could ask for. Apollo had survived. Throughout 1965, SA-6, 7, 8, 9, and 10 all launch with boilerplate Apollo spacecraft. These are simply mock-ups to simulate the aerodynamic effect of the spacecraft on top of the rocket in flight. The later missions all carried a Pegasus satellite, which extended giant panels out into space and absorbed the brunt of micrometeorite impacts in order to determine the extent to which the spacecraft might be struck by flying particles in space. Meanwhile, back in the test facilities, there grows another problem. The Apollo spacecraft keeps getting heavier. Soon, engineers realize that the S-4 stage might not be able to provide the power needed to push the final payload to the Moon. And another issue. During a drop test in late 1965, the Apollo Block 1's heat shield ruptures upon contact with the water, and the vehicle begins to sink. It's a dim year for the Apollo program. The heat shield is frustrating, but an easy fix. Stronger and heavier materials are put into the final design, marking the death of the S-4 as an active stage in further development. Engineers completely redesigned the stage from the ground up, and out of the ashes of defeat emerges the S-4B. The S-4B is a far cry from the original S-4. It's nearly 30% longer, and instead of 6 RL-10 Centaur engines, it uses only a single, restartable J2 engine, the type that would be clustered in a group of 5 on the larger Saturn V's rocket's second stage. This switch from 6 small engines to 1 large engine also has an added bonus: simplicity. The new stage is ready for its first test, and by February of 1966, NASA's test program is in full swing. AS-201 launches with 2 yet unflown components, an S-4B with an Apollo Block 1 spacecraft on top. It is the first time an Apollo vehicle is riding into space. AS-202 and AS-203 all complete the same successful unmanned suborbital test of the Block 1 Command and Service Module atop an S-4B. And on February 21st, 1967, AS-204 is renamed Apollo 1, scheduling to take the first 3-man Apollo crew into space. Gus Grissom, Roger Chaffee, and Ed White all subsequently perished during a pad fire on January 27, 1967. Just like that, all further manned flights with the Block 1 are canceled. During the 18-month investigation, it's revealed that flammable materials were used in the Velcro for the Block 1 spacecraft, and exposed wiring inside the cabin caused a spark, which ignited the 16 pounds per square inch of pure, pressurized oxygen inside. No Apollo test flies for nearly 7 months. On November 9, 1967, the Advanced Saturn missile, simply known as the Saturn V, is ready for its first test. The S-4B, which was the second stage on the Saturn 1B, is now the third stage of the Saturn V. Below it is a cluster of 5 J2 engines, collectively known as the S2 stage, and below that are a cluster of 5 F1 engines, the likes of which had never been seen before, making up the S-1C. Both the S-1C and the S-2 have not yet been flown, but the late president's deadline was getting closer by the minute, and NASA began to adopt a strategy of all-up testing, verifying multiple new concepts in a single mission. Early in the morning at Cape Canaveral, Apollo 4 is ready to go.
Apollo Saturn V, designed to propel the United States manned lunar landing mission. 3 million parts from the labor of people at 20,000 companies, universities, and government facilities. A first stage assembled in Louisiana, using parts from Kansas, Missouri, Washington, and many other states. A second stage shipped to the Kennedy Space Center in Florida through the Panama Canal from California, with a stopover in Mississippi for testing. A third stage flown from California to Florida. An instrument unit from Alabama. The spacecraft came from factories in Oklahoma, New York, and California, and electronic systems came from such widely separated sources as Massachusetts and Wisconsin. Major equipment to prepare, test, launch, guide, track, and recover the spacecraft are the products of Minnesota, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Arizona, Ohio, Tennessee, and other states.
Houston flight now confirms that they are go for the flight, as are all other aspects of the mission. T-minus 1 minute, 16 seconds and counting. The pressurization continuing within the vehicle at this time. We also have a hydraulic commit that will permit the hydraulics to drive the engines in the first stage. Liquid hydrogen tank in the second stage now pressurizing. T-minus 60 seconds.
The Saturn V had never been flown before. The entire Apollo program, perhaps even the chances of making a lunar landing within the 20th century, rested on the success of Apollo 4. The largest flying machine ever created stood silently out near the waters, a staggering 363 feet tall. When all 5 F-1 engines ignited together, it would be one of the loudest noises ever created by humankind, superseded only by nuclear weapons.
Stage is reporting ready for launch. T-minus 20, 19, 18, 17, 16, 15, 14, 13, 12, 11, 10, 9. Ignition sequence starts. 5, 4. We have ignition. All engines are running. We have liftoff. We have liftoff at 7 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. The tower has...
My God, our building's shaking here. Our building's shaking. Oh, it's terrific. The building's shaking. This big glass window is shaking. We're holding it with our hands. Look at that rocket go into the clouds at 3,000 feet. Oh, it's terrific. Look at it going. You can see it. You can see it. Part of our roof is coming here.
The test had gone perfectly. Flying right on target atop 7.5 million pounds of thrust, everything came together in a symphony of excellence that could only be the result of hundreds of thousands of man-hours dedicated to working, testing, and persevering. Apollo 4 had demonstrated just how far the program had come. The first successful flight of a 3-stage rocket had put the moon into NASA's hands. Now, all that was needed was the will and bravery to go there, and that would be reflected in the astronauts and missions to follow. Apollo 5 saw the first lunar module fly into space atop an unmanned Saturn 1B, and Apollo 6 duplicated the flight of Apollo 4, And although there were minor engine troubles that were the result of crossed wiring, NASA now had the confidence in its own hardware to press on and explore another world.